I went camping alone in early May, deep in the Sierra Nevada foothills. I picked a place that I'd been to once before with a few friends. It was remote, quiet, and far away from cell service. I needed the break. Life back home had started to feel like a tightening belt, and I thought being in the woods would help me breathe again. I took my truck, loaded it with the basics: tent, food, a cooler full of ice, a folding chair, my little propane stove, and a few tools. I didn't bring a gun, just a hatchet and a large hunting knife I always kept strapped to my pack. The drive was about 5 hours. The road turned to gravel an hour before I reached the trailhead. From there, it was about a 2-mile hike to the spot I'd chosen. It was near a shallow creek, surrounded by thick pines and a steep rocky slope on one side. I liked it because it had only one real entry point unless someone wanted to climb rocks or wade through water. It felt protected. I set up camp around 3 p.m. The sun filtered down through the trees, and everything smelled of pine and dirt. I pitched my tent on a flat patch of ground, arranged some stones for a fire ring, and gathered up dry wood. After setting up, I walked around a bit, getting a feel for how the land had changed. A few trees had fallen since I'd last been there, and the creek was running a little faster from the snowmelt. Other than that, it looked the same. By dusk, I had a small fire going. I cooked some beans and sausage on the stove and watched the flames until the stars came out. It got cold quickly, so I bundled up and sat back in my chair, listening to the rushing water and the wind brushing the tops of the trees. There were distant cracking sounds now and then, which is normal in the woods. Trees shift, branches fall, animals scurry. I wasn't nervous, not yet. I turned in early that night. I left the fire to burn down on its own, zipped up my tent, and crawled into my sleeping bag. I remember lying there in the quiet for a long time, just listening. There's a certain depth to silence out there, like it presses in on you. Eventually, I fell asleep. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up. I don't know why, but my eyes snapped open and I was fully alert. I didn't hear anything at first, just the usual background noise of the forest. But something felt off. It was like the air had changed. I stayed still, listening. Then I heard it. Something crunching in the leaves outside my tent. It wasn't loud, not like heavy footsteps. It was slow, deliberate, not the skittering of a raccoon or the frantic hops of a rabbit. This sounded like a person walking carefully. I held my breath. It circled halfway around the tent, paused, then went quiet. I waited, heart pounding. My hand slowly crept toward the knife beside me. I lay there like that for what felt like an hour, but was probably just 5 minutes. Eventually, I heard nothing else, and I must have drifted off again. In the morning, I got out of the tent and checked around the camp. No tracks, nothing out of place. Maybe it had been a deer. Still, it left me on edge. I kept a closer eye on my surroundings that day. I hiked a few miles around the area, followed the creek upstream, and sat for a while on a high ridge. Nothing seemed strange. When I got back, I gathered more firewood and even made a few markers with sticks and stones around the perimeter of my camp, just so I could tell if anything passed through. That second night, I built the fire higher. I cooked, cleaned up, and settled in like before, but I didn't go to sleep right away. I sat by the fire well into the night, listening. Around midnight, I heard something out in the woods again. Not close, but it sounded like someone moving between trees. Again, slow, measured steps. Stopped and started. I stood up, knife in hand, and stared out into the dark, but I couldn't see anything. After a while, it stopped. I doused the fire most of the way, leaving just a bit of glow, and went into my tent. I didn't sleep much. Every sound made me flinch. A few times I swore I heard something brushing against the outside of the tent. Not scratching, just movement. I lay there with the knife in my hand all night. By morning, I had decided to cut the trip short. It wasn't worth the anxiety. I started packing up slowly, thinking I'd eat breakfast and head back to the truck. I took down the tent and started organizing my gear. That's when I noticed something about 50 yards away, up on the slope, behind a cluster of trees. It was a shape, just barely visible through the branches. It was a person. They were standing completely still, facing my camp. I froze. My hands instinctively gripped the knife. I didn't call out or move. I just stared. Whoever it was didn't move either. After about 30 seconds, I slowly backed toward the fire pit and grabbed my hatchet too. I kept my eyes on the shape. Then, just like that, it turned and walked into the trees. Not hurried, just walked. I didn't finish packing. I stuffed what I could into my pack, slung it over my shoulder, and left everything else. I didn't run. I didn't want to draw attention, but I walked fast. Every sound made me jump. I kept looking behind me. I didn't see anyone else. When I got to the trailhead and reached my truck, I locked the doors immediately and drove. Back at home, I told myself it must have been another camper. Maybe they were lost. But something about the way they stood there, silent, watching, not saying anything, it didn't sit right with me. Normal people don't do that. They call out, they wave, they make themselves known. This person did none of that. They just watched. For a week afterward, I couldn't sleep right. Every time the wind hit the side of my house or a car passed outside, I jolted awake. I kept checking my doors and windows, making sure everything was locked. I haven't gone back to that spot since. I probably never will. I still think about it sometimes when I'm lying in bed, staring at the ceiling. I'll never know who that was or what they wanted. Maybe nothing. Maybe they were just as startled by me as I was by them. But if that's true, why didn't they say anything? Why did they come back a second night? Why did they wait until I was almost packed up to show themselves? Those questions sit with me heavy and cold, just like the air that night in the woods. I was about 17 the summer it happened. It was one of those long summers where nothing felt urgent and every day stretched out in front of you like it could last forever. I had just finished school for the year, and I didn't have any plans lined up yet. No job, no responsibilities, just time to kill. A buddy of mine had talked about heading out for a weekend camping trip. He had invited a few of us, but in the end, it was just me and him that ended up going. Everyone else had dropped out for one reason or another, but we decided to go anyway. The place we picked wasn't too far. It was a state park about 2 hours from the town I grew up in. Nothing too remote, but deep enough in the woods to feel like you were away from everything. We packed light, just tents, food, water, and the basics. No cell service out there, which was part of the appeal. Sometimes it felt good to shut off completely, get away from all the noise. We got there in the late afternoon, just as the sun was dipping low. The weather was perfect, clear skies, dry ground, cool air with just enough breeze. We found a campsite off one of the side trails. It was a designated area, not a completely wild spot, but it was tucked away from the more crowded areas. We only saw 1 or 2 other groups as we hiked in, and they were far enough off that we couldn't hear or see them from our sight. We set up our tents, gathered some wood, and got a fire going before it got dark. Dinner was just hot dogs and canned beans, nothing fancy, but out there, even simple stuff tastes good. We sat around the fire for a while, just talking and watching the flames flicker. No alcohol or anything like that, just 2 guys enjoying the quiet. The first night went by without anything strange. The sounds of the forest, bugs, birds, and the occasional rustle in the underbrush were constant but familiar. I grew up in the country, so those kinds of noises never bothered me. If anything, they were comforting. The next day, we did a bit of hiking. There were a couple trails marked on the map the park ranger had given us, and we tried one that led up to a small ridge overlooking the lake. The view was amazing, and we sat there for a while, eating jerky and passing the time. On the way back, we took a less traveled path that looped around a creek. That one wasn't on the official map, but it was clearly used, maybe by hunters or people fishing the creek. It felt a little more rugged, but not dangerous. Back at the site, we collected more wood, filtered some water from the creek, and cooked again. This time it was ramen noodles with some jerky thrown in. The fire crackled, the trees swayed, and the sky turned dark above us. That second night is when things started to feel off. It began subtle. We both noticed it around the same time. The usual nighttime sounds, crickets, frogs, birds, seemed to die out all at once. I know how that sounds, but it really was sudden. One moment everything was alive with noise, and the next, Silence. Not complete silence, but that kind of heavy, muffled quiet that feels wrong in the woods, like something is holding its breath. I looked at my friend. He looked back at me. Neither of us said anything, but we both heard it. After a few minutes, the normal sounds returned, slowly at first and then more confidently, like whatever had caused the silence was gone. We didn't make a big deal out of it, just assumed it was some larger animal passing nearby, maybe a bear or a bobcat. Sometimes the forest reacts like that. We put out the fire and got into our tents around midnight. I fell asleep quickly. Long hikes always left me drained. I don't know what time it was when I woke up, but it was still dark, the kind of dark that feels thick. There was no moon, and the clouds must have rolled in because I couldn't see a single star through the mesh of my tent. At first, I wasn't sure what woke me up. I thought maybe I just had a weird dream or needed to use the bathroom. I sat up quietly and listened. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. They weren't loud. More like soft crunches on leaves and twigs, slow and deliberate. Too heavy for a deer, too quiet for a bear. My stomach sank a little. I leaned over and grabbed the flashlight from my pack, switched it on, and unzipped the tent door slowly. I didn't shine the light right away. I just peered out through the opening. At first, I didn't see anything. The woods looked the same as before. Tall trees, darkness, shadows. But the footsteps kept going. Closer, then stopping, then starting again. Always slow, like someone walking in circles, not really approaching but never going far. My friend's tent was just 10 feet away, zipped up and quiet. I finally turned on the flashlight and shined it around. Nothing. The sound stopped when I did that. I waited for a minute, then two, then zipped my tent closed again. I left the flashlight on and kept it next to me, just in case. Eventually, I must have drifted off again because the next thing I knew, it was morning. I told my friend about it over breakfast. He said he hadn't heard anything. I almost let it go, figuring maybe I had imagined it. But a little later, when we walked out to the edge of the clearing to gather wood, we saw something strange. Boot prints, not ours. Ours had a distinct tread, heavy hiking boots. These were different, lighter, maybe a work boot or something flat-soled. They were scattered around the edges of the site, especially near the trees where the shadows had been thickest. Some prints overlapped ours from the day before. Others looked fresh. That made me nervous. We checked the tree line in all directions but didn't find anything. No gear, no signs of a person camping nearby, no trash or broken branches that would suggest someone else had come through. Just those prints. We debated whether to stay another night. I was leaning toward leaving, but my friend said it was probably just someone from one of the other sites who had gotten lost and wandered through. Still, we agreed to be more alert and keep a watch on the fire and our surroundings. That night, we didn't hike or go far from the fire. We kept it going longer than usual, and both of us stayed up late. Around midnight, we heard the footsteps again. This time, we were both awake. They came from the same direction as before, the far side of the clearing, just beyond the reach of the firelight. We stood still and listened. The steps were slow, careful, not like an animal moving on instinct. This sounded like someone who didn't want to be noticed but couldn't stay completely silent. We turned on both flashlights and swept them across the trees. Again, nothing. No movement, no figure, just the faint echo of those steps stopping as soon as the light moved. We didn't sleep much that night. I stayed in my tent with the light on, eyes wide open, ears straining for every sound. The next morning, we packed up early. Something about the place just didn't feel right anymore. As we broke down the tents and cleaned up the site, I walked to the spot where the sounds had come from. There were new boot prints again. Same tread, same deliberate pattern. No sign of a struggle or a dropped item, just prints. We hiked back to the main trail and didn't speak much on the way out. When we reached the ranger station, we let them know what we had experienced. They didn't seem too concerned. Probably a transient, they said, or a hiker who got turned around. It happens. But here's the thing. We had seen no one else that entire second day. No hikers on the trail, no campers nearby. And those prints, they circled our site, not just passing through. Felt like whoever it was had been watching us. That stuck with me. Still does. I've been camping many times since then, in places far more remote. I've encountered bears, coyotes, even a mountain lion once. But nothing ever made me feel as uneasy as those footsteps in the dark, just outside the reach of our fire. Whoever it was never showed themselves. They never took anything, never left a note or a message, but they were there, just out of sight, listening, watching, and maybe that's what made it so unsettling. Because people are the scariest part of the woods. Not what you imagine out there, not ghosts or monsters, just someone with a reason you'll never understand, standing in the dark, waiting. And the only reason we even knew they were there was because they wanted us to. I've worked as a safari guide in the Lowveld for close to 7 years now. That patch of bushveld down in the northeastern part of South Africa, it becomes part of you. Dry acacia thickets, mopane trees, dusty game trails, and long evenings filled with distant hyena whoops and lion calls. I've had close calls before, plenty in fact, but nothing like that particular winter morning. The thing about the Lowveld is that it hides things well. The terrain looks open at a glance, but everything is built for concealment. Predators, prey, danger. It all blends into the grasses and brush. I'd become used to the rhythms of the bush, its smells, sounds, and signs. I wasn't a rookie, and neither was Peter, my co-guide on that trip. We'd taken out groups before, sometimes tourists, sometimes field researchers, and now and then we'd just go out alone to stay sharp. This particular trip, it was just us. No clients, no students, no extra hands. We'd planned a short 3-day solo trail, mainly to scout a new route we were thinking of adding to our walking safaris. There's an area west of Satara, not too far from the Timbavati riverbed, where we'd heard there was good wildlife movement, especially during the dry season. Lions, elephants, the occasional black rhino. I was curious to see if we could map a safe, interesting path for small groups on foot. We were walking light, carrying only essentials, no vehicle support. It was meant to be a calm trip, a break even. We set out in late July. Winter in the Lowveld isn't what most people imagine when they think Africa. The days are dry and dusty, warm if you're standing in the sun. But the nights get brutally cold. Sometimes it dips just above freezing, especially in low-lying areas. That first day, we walked for about 15 kilometers through the scrub. We saw tracks, buffalo, impala, even some old leopard spoor near a donga, but nothing fresh enough to worry us. Found a decent spot on a slight rise, surrounded by knobthorn and sickle bush, with a good line of sight all around. We set up our small dome tents just before sunset. No fire, just a quick meal of biltong, dried fruit, and coffee before crawling into our sleeping bags. I was tired, but not dead tired. You don't really sleep deeply out here, not even when you're used to it. Your ears stay on even if your eyes shut. You hear the night talking to itself, an elephant breaking branches in the distance, the yipping contact calls of jackals, the dull grunts of impala bedding down. It's not restful, but it's real, and you get used to it. That night was colder than usual. I remember checking the temperature just after sundown. The little digital thermometer clipped to my backpack read 3 degrees Celsius. It must have dropped lower by the early hours. Sometime in the dead of night, I must have shifted in my sleep. I'd pushed the foam roll closer to the back of the tent, right up against the canvas, just to avoid the cold wind that sneaks in through the mesh vents. I remember being curled up tightly in my sleeping bag, trying to keep the warm air in. That's when I felt it, something warm and heavy against my back. Not a sudden pressure, not jarring. It felt natural at first, like someone had come up behind me and lay down. Firm, slow weight, kind of like how a large dog would settle next to you. It wasn't cold. In fact, the contact felt oddly comforting in that moment, almost welcome against the biting chill. I lay there, eyes still shut, not processing anything fully yet. I just felt warmth through the nylon of the tent. A thick, radiating heat, like a hot water bottle pressed up against me. And then came the realization. I was up against the canvas, and whatever was behind the canvas, pressing into my back, was alive. That kind of understanding doesn't come all at once. Comes in layers, like someone slowly removing a blindfold. First, I realized the canvas was bowed inward from the weight. Then I noticed the faintest pressure. It wasn't rigid. It shifted a little with each breath. I could feel it move. My brain flipped through possibilities. Could it be Peter? No, he was in his own tent. Maybe a hyena? But this was heavy, larger, and the warmth it gave off, it was the heat of something massive. My heart started tapping in my chest. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe deeply. I just listened. And then, a voice, quiet, barely audible, coming from a few meters away. Peter, whispering hoarsely from his tent. "The Africa bug? Are you awake?" It wasn't what he said, but how he said it. Tight, controlled, like he was forcing it out. Fear changes a voice, makes it sound thin and unnatural. My mouth opened before my mind caught up. "Yeah," I answered. A second passed, maybe two, and then it moved. The weight lifted off the tent. Not suddenly, not in a panic, but with purpose. I heard the scrape of claws against dry ground, the low thud of a heavy step, and then another. Whatever it was had stood up, right beside me. The canvas snapped back into place like a released spring. There was a brief shuffle of movement just beyond the tent wall, and then nothing. Silence. The kind of silence that feels loud because your blood's pounding in your ears. I lay frozen. I didn't want to unzip the tent. I didn't want to check. Every nerve was screaming, "Don't move." I just stared up at the black ceiling of the tent, heart racing, trying to swallow my breath. Eventually, I heard Peter unzip his flysheet, slow and cautious. He didn't say anything. I didn't either. We waited. Morning came like it always does. The light arrived soft and pale, leaking through the canvas. I finally sat up. Every joint was stiff. I unzipped the tent and stepped out into the frostbitten air. The grass crackled underfoot. I looked at the side of my tent. There was a large, smoothed-out patch in the dew, right up against the fabric, and a faint indentation in the soil. Then I saw the tracks. Lion, big male. The spoor was unmistakable. Massive front paws, clear pads. It had circled the camp from the south, walked between the two tents, and then lay down right beside mine. There were even hairs caught in a small tear in the canvas where the stitching had pulled slightly from the pressure. Coarse, tan hairs. I stood there, blinking at it, brain trying to adjust. Peter walked up to me, still holding his boots, looking like he hadn't slept a minute. We didn't need to say anything. We'd shared the camp with a full-grown male lion. The signs were all around now that we knew where to look. There was a slight drag mark in the grass where he'd shifted. His paw had flattened a patch of elephant dung. We followed the tracks for a few meters. He'd walked off toward a nearby thicket, probably moved on at first light. The rest of the morning passed in a kind of surreal fog. We didn't make coffee, didn't eat, just packed up quietly, heads on a swivel. Every bush, every shadow seemed to hold new weight. When you know what's out there and how close it's willing to get, it changes you. We walked back the way we came, 10, maybe 12 kilometers, back to the vehicle we'd stashed at the edge of the reserve. No talking, just walking. Every sound in the bush felt amplified. A squirrel's chatter made me flinch. A guinea fowl flush almost made Peter draw his sidearm. By midday, we were back at the backy, climbing into the cab with shaking hands. That's when it finally hit me what could have happened. Lions don't typically go after tents. They don't see us as prey, not in those situations. But a cold night, a tired animal, and the warmth of a human body radiating through nylon? Maybe curiosity, maybe comfort, maybe just luck that nothing worse happened. The thing that stuck with me wasn't just the lion. It was the fact that he lay there for who knows how long. Quiet, still, close enough to kill me without making a sound. Back at camp, we checked the GPS cross-referenced known lion territories in the area. There was a coalition operating nearby, known from camera traps. 2 males, both around 6 years old. One of them, we figured, must have wandered. Maybe lost track of his brother. Maybe just moved for warmth. I washed my clothes that afternoon, but the tent, well, I still have it. Stained, patched up now. I can't bring myself to throw it out. People always talk about the thrill of the bush, the chase, the sightings, the connection with nature. But what stays with you the longest isn't the roar of the lion across the plain. It's the soft sound of one breathing behind your back. The realization that something so wild, so powerful, chose not to kill you. Not out of kindness, but maybe just disinterest or chance. I went out again the next week. You have to. This life doesn't stop for fear. But now, every time I pitch that tent, I check the ground more carefully. I watch the breeze. I listen harder. And when the night comes down like a black curtain, I make damn sure I sleep in the middle of the clearing, not up against the canvas. Because I know what warmth really means out there. And I'll never forget how close I came to never waking up again. I've always liked camping alone. It's something I picked up in my early 20s. Just the quiet, the solitude, the stillness of bushland at night. There's a kind of peace you don't get in the city. A kind of peace that's only interrupted by the occasional rustling of leaves, a distant bird call, or the lazy buzz of a fly. I'd been doing solo trips for years without anything more eventful than an overturned water bottle or a ripped tarp. But this one trip, I think about it often. Sometimes late at night. Sometimes when I hear a sound I can't place. And I never went back to that spot again. It was early winter when I decided to head out. Not cold enough to keep me home, but enough to keep the snakes down and the bugs mostly quiet. The area I chose was a patch of bushland out past a small rural town I'd been through a few times, just under 2 hours from home. It was public land, but not heavily trafficked. It was the kind of place where the paths weren't marked, and you could go the whole weekend without seeing another soul. That was part of the appeal. I drove out on a Friday afternoon, pulling off the main dirt road about 30 minutes past the last mailbox, then onto a smaller, unmarked track. The weather was clear, the sun sitting low and casting long orange shadows through the trees. I drove slowly to avoid potholes and fallen branches, just letting the bush swallow me bit by bit. I parked the Uda in a little clearing I'd found on an old satellite map. Nothing official, just a small flat space surrounded by dry brush and gum trees. I unpacked my gear quickly. Tent first, always. I had a lightweight one-man setup, nothing fancy but reliable. Staked it down well since I didn't trust the wind. Then I set up a small fire ring with some old stones nearby, gathered some wood, and boiled water for tea. Dinner was simple: canned beans, a roll, a bit of beef jerky. I ate with the fire cracking in front of me, the dark settling in slow. The sky cleared fully by night, and the stars came out in the kind of display you only get far from towns. A big sky, an honest sky. The sounds of the bush picked up a bit after dark, like they usually do. A few frogs by a distant creek, the occasional crack of a stick from something moving through the underbrush. Most of the time it was possums or wallabies. Everything has a sound if you camp enough. You can tell the difference between a bird hopping through the leaves and a lizard scuttling off. You can tell the weight of things. I'd learned that over the years. By 9 or 10, I was in the tent with the fire burned low. I zipped the flap shut, slid into the sleeping bag, and lay there listening. I like that part, the half hour before you fall asleep, just soaking in the quiet. It wasn't completely silent. There was always some distant crack or flutter. But that night, something felt a little off. Not loud or violent or anything, just a bit off. A stillness between the normal sounds, a kind of gap. I must have drifted off around 11. Slept okay for a few hours. Then sometime deep in the night, maybe 2 a.m. or so, I woke up. I'm a light sleeper when I'm out camping, especially alone. My body's always half alert. What woke me wasn't a loud crash or anything dramatic. It was a plopping sound. That's the only way I can describe it. A wet, dull sound, like something soft and heavy dropping from a short distance. It wasn't followed by footsteps, rustling, or any scrambling. Just one isolated plop. Then nothing. I sat up inside the tent and listened. My heart was beating a bit faster, more from the sudden waking than fear. I kept still for a long time, straining to hear anything else. Nothing. No breathing, no walking, no voices. No crunching of leaves or cracking of twigs. Just the wind and the normal hum of the bush. After a few minutes, I figured maybe something had fallen from a tree. Maybe a branch broke loose and hit the ground. Maybe some bird dropped part of its meal. It didn't make sense, but things don't always make sense in the dark. I didn't unzip the tent, just lay back down and stared at the fabric ceiling, eyes wide open for a while. I think I drifted in and out of shallow sleep after that, not really resting. I remember it getting colder, pulling the bag up tighter, waiting for morning. When the light finally came, pale and gray and cold, I unzipped the tent and sat up. The ground outside was covered in damp leaves, some frost in the shadows. I stretched my legs, cracked my neck, and stepped out to get the fire going again. I turned left, walking around the tent to grab the kindling pile. That's when I saw it. Right next to the base of the tent, less than a foot from where my head had been all night, was the head of a kangaroo, cleanly severed. No blood trail, no body, just the head. It looked fresh. Its eyes were still wet, half-lidded. The fur hadn't dried. There were no signs of rot, no scavenger damage. Just a heavy, grayish-red head sitting slightly cocked in the leaf litter. I froze. My brain took a second to even process what I was looking at. I looked around instinctively. Nothing else. No tracks, no drag marks, no sounds. I walked in a wide circle around the tent, scanning the ground. The leaves were undisturbed. No sign that anyone or anything had walked through the area that night. The only impressions in the ground were from my own boots when I'd set up. And yet there it was. A kangaroo's head, clean and whole, placed neatly beside my shelter. It hadn't been there when I set up. Of that I was completely sure. I squatted down near it, not touching it, just staring. It wasn't old. No bugs on it yet. No smell of death. The cut wasn't ragged like a predator's work. It looked almost surgical, which was the worst part. I didn't think for long. I didn't eat, didn't boil water, just grabbed everything I could in one go. Tent, bag, food, and shoved it all into the back of the Uda without folding or packing properly. I didn't even tie down the tarp. The fire pit I left untouched. Drove out over branches and roots, bouncing hard along the uneven track, gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles hurt. I didn't slow down until I hit the sealed road. I kept checking the rearview mirror the whole way back, though I didn't see anything. When I got home, I left the gear in the car for 3 days. Didn't even want to look at it. Just locked the door, shut the curtains, and sat in my kitchen with the lights on. I never reported it. What would I say? There were no tire marks out there, no cameras, no people for kilometers. It didn't make sense to anyone but me. I didn't tell many people either, just a mate I trust, and even then I kept it vague. For a long time after, I stopped camping solo. Tried it again once or twice with friends, but the peace was gone. I found myself staring into the shadows too much, listening too hard, jumping at harmless noises. I still think about that head. Who or what put it there? Why just the head? Why next to my tent, so close to where I was sleeping? And how did they do it without making a sound? I still don't have answers, and I've read enough to know sometimes you just don't get them. Whatever happened out there, I trust my gut. Something wasn't right. Something was watching or testing or warning me. I don't know which, but I do know this. I won't ever go back to that part of the bush. Not alone. Not ever. It was during my last year of high school when a group of us decided to do something a little different for the long weekend. Most of the time, weekends were filled with the usual stuff. Hanging out in someone's basement, going to the movies, maybe hitting the lake in the summer. But this time, one of the guys suggested a backpacking trip. Out into the woods. Real camping, the kind where you carry everything on your back and hike away from the roads, away from phone signals, away from anything remotely comfortable or convenient. I've been car camping a few times as a kid, sure. Campsites with toilets and picnic tables, where the worst thing that might happen is forgetting the marshmallows. But this trip wasn't like that. We were going to hike out deep into the national forest, up through some hills and rocky areas, find a spot well away from everything, and spend the weekend roughing it. There were 5 of us. Me, 2 of my closest mates from school, and 2 more guys I knew from the track team. Everyone was excited. It felt like the right mix of something a little wild, a little grown up. We packed light but tried to be smart: tents, sleeping bags, food that wouldn't spoil, water filters, first aid. I borrowed a backpack from my older cousin who had done some multi-day hikes and spent the night before going over everything in my room, laying it all out and repacking it twice. We left on a Friday morning, drove a couple hours out to the trailhead where the dirt road ended, locked up the cars, and shouldered our packs. The plan was simple: hike in for most of the day, find a good flat spot, and set up camp. Spend 2 nights out there, then hike back on Sunday morning. Easy, at least on paper. The hike in was longer than we thought it would be. The terrain was rougher, more up and down than we expected, and we didn't make as much progress as we'd hoped in those first few hours. The path wasn't official, more like an old game trail with just enough where to follow. It wound through some thick forest, then up a ridge where the trees got more spread out and the underbrush cleared. That's where we ended up settling. We were probably 6 or 7 miles from the cars by then. No sign of other hikers, no sounds of people or traffic, just us and the woods. The area had a good slope for drainage, a flat spot for tents, a few dead logs we could sit on, and a rocky outcrop where you could look down over the trees and see nothing but wilderness stretching out for miles. We were beat. We pitched tents, 2 in one, 2 people in one, 2 in another, and me in my own. I liked the idea of having some space. I was tired but restless, and figured I'd sleep better if I didn't have someone breathing 2 feet from my face. After setting up, we cooked dinner, some freeze-dried stuff, trail mix, jerky. The sun went down quick in the trees, and it got cold fast. We gathered some dry wood, got a fire going, and just sat around until the yawns started coming. None of us were night owls out there. The kind of fatigue you get from hiking with weight on your back is deep. It hits your legs and your back and sits heavy in your head. By about 9:30, we'd all crawled into our tents, said a few half-hearted goodnights, and zipped up for the night. I lay there in my sleeping bag, listening. You get used to the silence pretty fast. But the thing is, it's never really silent in the woods. There's always something moving. Wind shifting branches, a bird fluttering, insects clicking. At first it can keep you awake, but after an hour or so, it just becomes part of the background. I must have fallen asleep for a while, not sure how long, but sometime in the dead middle of the night, I woke up with a start. I don't know if it was a noise or just some instinct, but I was instantly wide awake. Not drowsy, not groggy, just switched on like a light. First, it was dead quiet, too quiet, that kind of silence that almost feels like pressure in your ears. Then I heard it, a slow, crunching sound outside my tent. Not close, not right next to me, but near, maybe 10 or 15 feet away. Then another one, this time from the other side, like dry leaves being stepped on, twigs cracking under weight. I froze. For a few seconds, I didn't even breathe. My mind tried to play catch-up. What animal moves like that? Not fast, not scurrying, no snorting or sniffing or obvious clues. Just slow, deliberate steps. More than one set of steps. That's what got me. I could hear movement coming from different directions. Around the tent. Not circling fast, but like something or some things were slowly working their way closer. My heart was pounding. I listened harder, every hair on my body standing straight up. I could almost picture it. Shapes moving just beyond the thin fabric of the tent, just out of sight. I knew I had to look. I had to see what it was. My flashlight was next to me in the tent pocket. I grabbed it quietly, flicked the switch to low beam, and unzipped the flap just an inch. Nothing, just darkness. I waited, letting my eyes adjust, then eased the flap open a little wider and pointed the beam out into the black. That's when I saw them. Eyes, dozens of eyes, reflecting back at me from the trees. They weren't close to the ground. These weren't raccoons or possums or rabbits. These were higher, some almost level with my face as I sat half-crouched at the tent door. They didn't blink, didn't flinch, just stared. My throat went dry. My first thought was people. That some group had come up the trail behind us. That somehow someone had followed us in. But the shapes didn't move like people. They were still, almost frozen. I couldn't make out their bodies, just the eyes, spaced wide and high, motionless in the beam. Felt like forever. But eventually I saw a little movement. One of them turned its head slightly. The outline shifted in the dark and I saw it. A deer. Then another one moved. And another. All deer. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. A whole herd had come down the ridge in the night and were just standing there, surrounding the campsite, completely silent aside from the slow crunch of leaves under hoof. They weren't feeding. They weren't moving through. They were watching. I scanned around with the flashlight, and the beam bounced from eye to eye. At least 20 of them. Big ones too. Does and a few bucks, thick-necked and wide. Most people think deer are small, but up close, especially at night, they're big. Powerful. And those eyes, they don't have pupils like ours in the dark. They shine like glass in a firelight, like mirrors catching headlights. And they don't show fear the way you expect. I slowly zipped the tent shut again, sat back down on the sleeping bag and tried to breathe normal. I don't know how long they stayed. I listened for a long time. No more footsteps, no snorts or stomps, just silence again. Eventually, I drifted off, not into deep sleep, but the kind where you're half aware, ears always scanning. When the first light of dawn started seeping through the tent fabric, I got up, stiff, sore, and cold. I stepped outside and looked around. No sign of the deer. No hoof prints in the soft dirt, though I wasn't surprised. The leaf litter was thick, and the ground was dry. But I knew what I'd seen. I hadn't imagined it. When the others woke up, I didn't tell them right away. Felt strange to say out loud. Just said I'd had trouble sleeping. We hiked out the next day. No problems. No more visitors. By the time we got back to the cars, the deer encounter had faded into something almost dreamlike. But even now, years later, I still remember that feeling. The sound of footsteps in the dark. The sight of eyes, tall and wide-set, surrounding me in the black. It wasn't supernatural. There was no ghost or monster, just deer. But that doesn't make it less unnerving. There's something deeply primal about being watched in the night by silent figures. Something that touches a part of your brain that doesn't rely on reason. Just raw instinct. And I've camped many times since, but I always bring a stronger flashlight now. And I never, ever assume I'm alone out there. We were deep in the forest, well past the trails most people used. It was a long weekend near the end of summer break, and 4 of us from high school had planned this trip weeks in advance. We were all 17 then, old enough to think we knew everything, but still young enough to get completely shaken by the unexpected. None of us had much experience, but we had just enough gear and just enough confidence to think we could rough it in the woods for 3 nights. Our plan was simple. Hike in, set up camp, hang out, and hike back out. What happened on the second night, though, changed the whole way I saw the woods and animals for a long time after. The hike out there had been hard. We loaded our packs with too much food, too much gear, and not enough water. The trail started off easy, wide, and clear, but narrowed and climbed quickly once we veered onto the older, less used path. We were maybe 10 miles in when we found a flat stretch of land tucked between thick woods and a shallow stream. It wasn't a marked site, but it had clearly been used before. There was a rough circle of stones for a fire pit and a few logs pulled together into makeshift benches. We were sore and sweaty by the time we stopped, our shoulders aching and our feet raw from boots we hadn't broken in properly. We pitched our tents in a rough semicircle around the fire pit and gathered firewood for the night. The stream nearby was just enough to wash our hands and fill our bottles after filtering. The trees were dense and tall, mostly pine and fir, with a thick carpet of dry needles below that made every step silent. The wind moved constantly through the tops of the trees, but on the ground, it was dead still. No breeze, no birds calling. The only real sound was us. The first night went by uneventfully. We sat around the fire, poking at the flames, eating jerky and canned food, and trying to ignore the growing cold. No one wanted to admit they were nervous, but I could tell from the way we kept looking over our shoulders that we all felt the same. The forest was too quiet. It wasn't like a campground where you hear other people, animals, or distant cars. It was just this wide, black stillness. We stayed up until around 1 in the morning before crawling into our tents and falling into restless sleep. The second day, we hiked out a little further to explore the ridgeline that ran above our site. We packed a small day bag and followed the sound of the stream uphill. It was steep, covered in loose rock and roots, and we climbed slowly, slipping every now and then. By the time we reached the top, the trees broke open into a small clearing, and we could see for miles, just endless forest in all directions. No signs of people, no smoke trails from cabins, nothing. It was exciting at first, but the longer we stood there, the more isolated it felt. After a while, we hiked back down to camp in silence. We got the fire going again once the sun dropped behind the trees. We ate and passed around a single can of warm beer someone had snuck along. The night came fast. There's no slow fade to darkness in the woods, just the sun dropping and then everything turning black. We had the fire lit, but it was low. We were saving wood for later in the night, just enough to throw off a bit of heat and light. Our flashlights were out and resting on the logs, but mostly we sat there in that weird orange glow, watching the flames flicker and spit now and then. It was probably around 2 in the morning when it happened. The fire was low, and we were just starting to talk about turning in. The air was cold by then. I had my hood pulled up and was leaning close to the flames, rubbing my hands together. Everything felt still. The woods behind us were dark, pitch black. Really, you couldn't see past the edge of the firelight. Then there was this rustling sound. It wasn't loud at first, just a soft scuffle through leaves and brush. I figured it was one of us getting up, but no one had moved. We all paused. The fire crackled, and the sound came again, from just beyond where the firelight stopped. We clicked on our flashlights, aiming them out into the woods. The beams cut through the dark, bright and narrow, catching the occasional tree trunk or thick underbrush. Nothing moved. I felt that strange pressure in my chest, like my body knew something before my brain did. Then we heard it again. This fast, scratching sound, like paws or claws on dry ground, followed by a sudden blur of motion from the shadows. Something small bolted toward us. Came so fast, none of us even had time to react. We all jumped back from the fire as this little shape flew into the campsite. At first, it looked like a rat or a large mouse, but as it got closer, we could see it had short legs, a long nose, and gray-brown fur. It was a mole. It was running in this strange, jerking pattern, like it didn't know where it was going. Its eyes were wide, tiny, but wild-looking. It was squeaking, high and loud, its little feet scrabbling over the ground. Before any of us could do anything, it ran straight into the fire. It didn't stop or even slow down. It shot across the dirt and leapt right into the coals. There was this short hissing sound, then a horrible squeal as the thing landed square in the middle of the burning wood. The smell hit us first, this awful mix of burning fur and flesh. Then came the sound, wet, sizzling, like meat hitting a hot pan, but louder. Thrashed for a second, flipping in place, then fell still. We were all frozen, staring at the fire. No one moved. No one said anything. The mole's little body twitched once or twice, its fur blackening and curling into crisp patches. The flames danced around it, licking over the shape, charring it quickly until it just blended in with the rest of the coals. It didn't take long, maybe a minute, but that minute felt like forever. My hands were shaking, and I remember looking at my shoes, not wanting to look at the fire again. That noise, the sizzling pop of muscle and skin, stuck in my head. I could smell it in my nose, thick and bitter, like burned meat and hair. My stomach turned. We didn't sleep much that night. Every little noise in the woods had us snapping our heads around, expecting something else to come running into camp. The fire stayed lit until dawn, not because we were cold, but because no one wanted to sit in darkness. One of us kept it going the whole time, feeding it slowly, just staring into the flames. When the sky finally started to lighten, we all stood up slowly, stiff and cold, our eyes heavy. The fire had burned down to glowing coals, and you could just barely make out the scorched shape of the mole still sitting near the center. It didn't look like an animal anymore, just this blackened mass, hunched and curled in on itself. We didn't talk about it. I don't think any of us really knew what to say. But when the sun was fully up and the woods began to warm, we did something I didn't expect. One of the guys grabbed a flat rock and used it to scoop the remains out of the fire. The fur and skin had mostly burned away, leaving behind brittle bones and twisted limbs. We walked a short way from camp and dug a shallow hole beneath a tree. The dirt was cold and loose, and the ground gave easily. We placed the mole's remains in the hole, covered it gently with soil and pine needles, and stood around it for a few moments. It was quiet, not like the night before, but still this peaceful quiet. The kind that fills the woods when the birds are just waking up and the wind is light. We didn't say anything. We just stood there for a while. Then we packed up and left. None of us felt like staying another night. The hike back felt longer than it had coming in. Our legs were sore, and our packs felt heavier somehow. No one really spoke until we reached the car. The trip that had started as some fun end-of-summer adventure turned into something else entirely. It wasn't just the mole, it was what it did to us, the way it changed the atmosphere in camp. It made us all realize how unpredictable nature really is. We think we know how animals behave. We think we understand the forest, but we don't. To this day, I still don't know why that mole ran into our fire. Maybe it was sick or panicked. Maybe it got confused by the light and heat. Maybe it had something wrong with its brain. I've read a lot about animal behavior since then, and there are all kinds of explanations: disease, disorientation, even parasites that can cause self-destructive actions. But I don't think the reason matters anymore. What stuck with me was that sound, the squeal, the sizzle, and the way we all stood there, helpless, watching something small and alive die right in front of us. We weren't in danger. It wasn't a bear or a mountain lion. It was just a mole. But it left a mark deeper than any scare from some big predator ever could. It reminded me how close life is to death out there, how fast it can change, how even something tiny can burn itself out in a flash and leave you staring at the flames, wondering what the hell just happened. And that's why I don't camp that far-off trail anymore. Not because I'm afraid of the woods. I still hike. I still love being out there. But I carry that moment with me. Quiet, dark, and sudden, and I never let the fire burn too low. I don't usually camp alone, but that year was different. I had just gone through a lot. A long-term relationship ended. I got laid off from a job I'd held for 6 years, and the city had started feeling like it was pressing in from all sides. Everything that used to be familiar and comfortable started feeling loud, cramped, and artificial. I needed to reset, clear my head. So I picked a spot I'd once visited years back with a few buddies, a quiet, mostly unused stretch of forest land up north near a disused fire road, deep enough off any hiking trail that you'd have to know it existed to get there. It wasn't an official campsite, just flat land with a clearing and some evidence of past use, like a few half-buried bottles and a rusted can from who knows how long ago. That kind of place. It was early fall, just when the leaves start to lose their color and fall slow and dry around you. The air carried that cold bite in the early mornings and after sunset, the kind that makes your jacket feel more important than your food. I brought enough supplies to last me 3 days: food, water, some firewood, extra layers, a first aid kit, and a book I'd already read a dozen times. My phone had no reception out there, which was half the point. I kept it off most of the time except to check the time. That first night was still, just the faint crackle of the fire and a few hoots from an owl off somewhere in the darkness. The second night was when the cat showed up. I was sitting by the fire, stirring a pot of chili I'd reheated from a can. I had my headlamp on low, trying not to attract too many bugs, and the fire was burning down to glowing coals, just warm enough to keep the cold from getting into my bones. That's when I heard this soft rustling to my left. I stopped stirring and looked. First, I thought it was a raccoon. I saw this shape, low to the ground, moving slowly but not with that nervous energy raccoons usually have. Then, it stepped into the dim light from the fire, and it was just a cat. Just a plain black cat. Not scrawny, not wild-looking. It wasn't wearing a collar or anything, but its fur looked clean, and it moved with the casual confidence of a house cat that had been let out for the day. It looked at me, blinked slowly, and then curled up right near the edge of the heat radius, right where the cold meets the warm. I remember thinking it was kind of funny. This little cat, out in the middle of nowhere, just decided to act like it lived there. like it was just another camper who'd had a long day and wanted to warm up before bed. It didn't meow or purr. It didn't come begging for food. It didn't even flinch when I stood up to grab more firewood. It just stayed there, sitting, tail wrapped around its paws, eyes half shut. That night, I left a little of the chili in the pot near where it had been sitting. When I got up to pee around 3 a.m., the cat was gone, and the pot was clean. The next day was cold. The kind of cold that doesn't seem to go away even when the sun is out. I spent the morning hiking a bit, keeping close to camp, and then spent most of the afternoon reading, tossing pine cones into the fire when I got bored. I didn't really think about the cat much until just before dusk, when I looked up from the book and saw it again. Same cat, same slow approach from the woods, same casual attitude. It came from a different direction this time, but still ended up curling up right in the same spot it had the night before, like it knew the layout and had claimed its seat. It didn't feel threatening, just strange, off maybe. Something about how comfortable it was bothered me, but not enough to really think too hard about it. I started imagining it had an owner nearby, a survivalist or some backwoods loner living in a cabin I hadn't seen. Maybe it wandered around the area and visited campsites for scraps. That would make sense. Animals do that, but I hadn't seen any signs of human activity for miles. No footprints, no bike tracks, nothing. That night, I woke up to a sound. It was faint, but it was the kind of sound that pushes into your brain even when you're half asleep. A soft scraping noise, not like claws on metal, more like something moving across nylon. I stayed still, letting my ears adjust, and realized the sound was right outside the tent. I didn't move. I waited. The scraping stopped, and then there was a soft thump against the side of the tent. Just one, like something testing it. Then silence. I lay there for maybe 20 minutes, heart pounding, staring at the ceiling of my tent, waiting for another noise. But there was nothing. Eventually, I drifted off again, but I had that half sleep, the kind where your brain never fully shuts down and you wake up exhausted. In the morning, I found small paw prints in the dirt outside the tent. Cat prints. They circled once, then wandered off toward the trees. The odd thing was the spacing. They weren't random like you'd expect. They formed a loop around the tent, tight, deliberate, like the cat had walked a circle around it before leaving. I tried to brush it off. Maybe it was curious. Cats are weird like that, but it lingered in the back of my head the whole day. I started noticing other things too. Birds were quieter than usual. No squirrels or rabbits. I hadn't seen any animal life except that cat since I got there. That's not normal. Not even deep in the woods. You always hear something. The final night was the worst. The cat came back right after sunset. It didn't walk into camp like before. I saw it already sitting there, waiting, like it had gotten there before me. I'd gone to gather some dead branches for the fire, and when I came back, it was just sitting in that same spot again, staring at the dying embers like it belonged there. I kept the fire going late. I didn't feel tired. Something about the air felt charged. I couldn't put my finger on it. I just had that feeling you get when you know someone's watching you, even if you can't see them. The woods felt too quiet. I hadn't heard anything all day. No wind through the trees, no birds, not even the creak of branches shifting as the temperature dropped. The cat stayed perfectly still for hours. It never once moved, not even when I got up, walked around, added wood to the fire, or stretched my legs. It just watched the flames. Every now and then it would blink, slow and heavy-lidded like it was fighting sleep, but it never curled up like before. It stayed sitting, tail twitching just barely, eyes half-lidded but never closed. I finally went into the tent around midnight, zipped it tight, and left my boots on just in case. I left my flashlight within reach and laid there with my headlamp on red mode, trying to calm myself down. I could still see the glow of the fire through the fabric of the tent. I tried reading, but I couldn't concentrate. Every sound felt amplified. Every crack of the fire, every creak of nylon as I shifted. Around 2:30 a.m., I heard something again. Soft steps in the dirt. Not the clumsy scuffling of a raccoon or the heavy tread of a deer. Just soft, rhythmic steps. Then came the sound of something brushing up against the side of the tent. Not scratching this time, not testing, just contact, like it was leaning against it. Then I saw the silhouette. The fire behind it made it clear. A cat pressed right up against the mesh window, sitting upright. Still, I didn't sleep again that night. I lay there until dawn, heart pounding, my breathing shallow and controlled. I kept expecting some movement, some escalation, but the silhouette never moved. It stayed there for hours until the light started bleeding into the sky. When I finally unzipped the tent just after sunrise, the fire had burned to cold ash, and the cat was gone. Not a single paw print in the dirt. Not one. That morning, I packed up camp in silence. I kept scanning the trees, the bushes, everything. I didn't even eat. I just wanted to get back to my truck and off that fire road as fast as possible. I didn't feel safe, not because of anything specific, but because I realized I hadn't felt alone out there for 2 nights straight, and I had no idea what that meant. As I started walking, I caught one last thing. About 50 feet from the edge of camp, where the trees get thicker, I saw a single pile of scat. Old, dried out, but there were small, clean bones in it. Bird bones, maybe, or something smaller. Right beside it was what looked like part of a collar. Torn, cracked leather, faded red. I never reported anything. What would I say? It was just a cat. But something about the way it behaved, the way it watched the fire like it had done it before, the way it sat up outside the tent for hours, still patient, unmoving, it wasn't normal. I still camp. I still go out into the woods when I need to breathe. But I haven't been back to that spot since. And I never will, because sometimes the scariest things out there aren't the loud ones. It's the ones that act like they belong. The ones that don't do anything wrong. The ones that act just like they're supposed to. I loved that it acted like a normal cat. That's what scared me the most.